there, I'm Krillic, but without the crazy intro and the lab coat, because this is the second and final part of the Lost Age of Giants video. As a quick reminder, this is written by Kiskeym on Medium, so go follow him there. In addition, this uses a strong mix of scrapped lore, canon lore, and a lot of speculation that begins with this secret war between Arceus and the giants whose powers became the plates of Arceus, as told through the Flame Plate. These giants embody the typings of the world of Pokemon. They were effectively the first beings, alongside their own trees of life, on planets far away from Earth, effectively prototypes of the world of Earth. And they eventually rebelled against Arceus, only to result in absolute ruin, and their bodies to be used to rebuild the universe as we know it, giving bodies to Pokemon like Dialga, Palkia, Giratina, and more, all relating back to Regigigas and even other gigantic Pokemon. But now that you're effectively caught up, I'll let past me take things back over as we dig into Ultra Necrozma. Okay, the next chapter is literally called Cerebral plus Ultra, and if I wasn't bought already, I'm a bit of a fanboy for My Hero Academia, so I'm bought even more. Following the trend inaugurated in X and Y, Generation 7 also introduced its own battle gimmick. Z-moves are incredibly powerful attacks performed using a move among the user's moveset as a basis, usually drawing the power of a certain type, more rarely from the attack of a specific Pokemon. According to one tome in Melee Library, the Z in the name stands for Zenith, more accurately Zenroku, full power or full force. In the original script, through the combined efforts of the Pokemon and its trainer, the full potential of their moves is revealed, resulting in an all-powerful attack. Some myriad of Z-moves notes the vigor and strength of the trainer combined with their Pokemon, as they bring everything out of one another in a singular move. Thus came the Z of Zenith or Zenith. Immediately we can notice some obvious similarities with Mega Evolution. Both processes unlock a latent force within the Pokemon as a result of mutual cooperation. Moreover, both are triggered through comparable mechanisms. While Mega Evolution requires a Mega Stone, a Pokemon can perform a Z move only by holding a Z Crystal, either one specific for its kind or one generic for its typing. These are described as crystallized forms of Z power, meaning an energy analogous to Mega Power also exists in the Alola region. Much like Mega Evolution requires a Mega Ring, so Z-moves need their Z-Ring, or the upgraded Z-Power Ring in Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon. While the mechanisms isn't discussed in detail, we can imagine the radiation from Z-Crystals also doesn't activate spontaneously, requiring an external input from the ring, which is in turn only charged by human life force, which I think is almost literally quite what happens. It's why they stressed so much about human and nature being one and how humans need to take care of the planet, or rather the region of Alola, and also why Ultra Necrozma was able to take the light of Alola and it made all the humans fatigued, or rather at least the adults. As for where the energy of the trainer is stored, the bracelets are actually made from a refined sparkling stone, concept art showing its raw form to be akin to a natural crystal. These are, in short, perfectly comparable to keystones. As they are less detachable from the Z-Ring, however, all trainers who perform a Z-move must acquire one of the devices. Even minor NPCs who have access to the gimmick were given an alternative model displaying it on their wrist. After all, it seems developers managed to implement the idea originally meant for Mega Rings, which are instead shown less and less in Sun and Moon, implying a keystone can work just as fine without an external support. The parallels between Z-moves and Mega Evolution aren't kept particularly secret. The two are mutually exclusive, as even Mega Rayquaza is prevented from Mega Evolving after using a Z-move, despite not requiring to carry a Mega Stone. Dexio and Cinna comment on the similarities explicitly, also noticing how a Z-Ring can function as a Mega Ring if equipped with a Keystone, as both procedures work through the bond between humans and Pokemon. Similarly to how described in the leaked document for Mega Evolution, concept arts also show the process of using a Z-move as tiring for the trainer, as their life force plays an active role. The poses we perform before the attack, then, are to be seen as the physical manifestation of that bond, the way we show gratitude to our companions and redirect the energy towards it. So we could have done a billion different silly dances, anything else that we wanted to, and we would have been able to pull off these Z moves. But it's through like this belief system, this belief and this connection, this bond that we have, that we as humans are effectively able to project that power. That since we believe by punching the air or by doing these little waves with our arms that we are becoming one with these typings, the fighting typing or the water typing that our Pokemon manifests into existence and represent in their own right, thus allowing us to connect with them on the physical, the metaphysical, and more, so that way we can be one with their move and draw out that energy, that power, and share it together to then bring it to that zenith, that peak of power that they do have. I'm hoping everyone at home is understanding this and is just as bought in as I am, because this is making a very clear amount of sense to me. Perhaps other cultures would have developed a different mannerism to reach the same end, which, okay, that's pretty much what I just said. But in the Alola region, traditional dances expressed thankfulness, and so this meaning was carried over in battle. Investigating more on Z-Power as a whole only highlights more overlaps. Through the studies of Kukui, Burnett, the Aether Foundation, and the Ultra Recon Squad, we come to learn that the energy of Z-moves is also the same found in Ultra Wormholes. These rifts in space-time were originally thought to lead to a different dimension by the researchers of Aether Foundation, but this is only partially correct. Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon show that many different worlds lie beyond the instabilities past a first interdimensional space, and these are more popularly described as parallel continuities even in development files. James Turner also compared Ultra Wormholes to scientific depictions of black holes, which are often imagined to lead to different universes in sci-fi settings. On top of fractured glass and auroras, concept arts showing how their bright sight on the inside pours light on the outside, creating a rainbow-like effect. In any case, this is not only confirming that Z-Power to not be from this Earth, as the amount harvested inside the crystals originally came from the rifts, but also to bear properties disrupting this space-time continuum. I think I know where this is going, and it's going to go into the direction that with Ultra Necrozma being such a being of light, knowing the crystals would have come from Necrozma, being a giant or even a partial form of a giant, that it in its own state, with all the light that it produces, could also be representative of the inverse of a black hole. In the different worlds beyond Ultra Wormholes, there are Pokemon which have adapted to the peculiar energy of the portals, appropriately named Ultra Beasts. The shared peculiarity of this group of creatures is that they developed the capacity to store Z-Power in their bodies and to use it to increase their stats in battle. This ability, known as Beast Boost, can also manifest in the form of a red aura surrounding the Pokemon, rising one stat at the start of the fight. A similar phenomenon also exists on Earth with Totem Pokemon, otherwise directly translated as Leader Pokemon, being surrounded by an orange aura with analogous effects. And those, as guardians of Z-Crystals and Alola, are said to have been irradiated by Z-Power as well. The Totem specimens also undergo a seemingly indefinite process of gigantification, featuring larger proportions than the norm, just like Mega Power can also enlarge the bodies of rogue Mega Pokemon. Something that I want to tie to this is that when you have an excess amount of life energy given to a Pokemon, and in all of these different forms, we get a lot of this gigantism. We see it in Paldea, we see it here with the Totem Pokemon, we see it with those Mega forms. That this might also just simply be a way for Pokemon to try and get rid of that excess energy. They have to use it. Their bodies have to become a larger container for it, so that way they can get rid of it, which is the ultimate goal because it's unstable within the containers of bodies that they have. To sum this up, Z-Power is an extraterrestrial energy that can distort reality, is prone to crystallization, can enlarge Pokemon affected by it, and shares much of its mechanisms with Mega Evolution. This is no doubt yet another Giant's power. The only pattern that is more ambiguous is its relation with flora, as no plant in Alola is explicitly affected by it. It is possible we simply never see a remarkable example, and Z-Power is said to affect nature, other than living beings, but this lacking might also be explained through cut content. I'm gonna say right now that instead of it being a flora, a plant, then instead it's the Tapus, and through their signature moves, they have their own form of gigantism in those signature moves, that without this power, without this connection to nature, that they can't access these moves. So I'm gonna contradict what Kiskeym says, and I'm gonna say there absolutely is a way to go about it, as they are spirits of nature. They aren't plants themselves, but goes into that embodiment of nature as they stated. But back into that cut content, the battle tree is an enormous tree in Pony Island, functioning as the region's battle facility. Its role in the narrative is marginal at best, but first drafts show how many of the opponents here were meant to have come to Alola through Ultra wormholes, including Cynthia, Wally, and a first version of Team Rainbow Rocket. I will just about cry if I read anything stating that red and blue were from a wormhole, just like the Giovanni Rainbow Rocket that came through here, because if the original concept has anything to say on that, then my theory that Giovanni killed the first faller, or rather caused the first faller to occur, which would have been green/leaf green, as I have in its own entire video, I don't know what else there is to say. I will lose my mind. While this is no longer the case, it seems the original idea was for the plants to have grown on top of dimensional instabilities, which perhaps explains its unusually large proportions. Many trainers in the battle tree also feature legendary Pokemon in their teams, despite no prominent leader of the facility using them like those from analogous structures in other regions. Then it is possible that those powerful creatures were also meant to have gathered here as a result of many wormholes opening in its proximity. To follow, we get a description that would lead us to Necrozma. The light pouring out from all over its body affects living things in nature, impacting them in various ways, or allow me to correct myself, Ultra Necrozma. Contrary to Mega Evolution, however, we do meet the ruler of Z-Power. In Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon, we learn that both Z-Crystals and Sparkling Stones are actually fragments of Necrozma's body arrived on Earth through Ultra Wormholes, which the creature can open itself by manipulating its special light. In fact, according to the Ultra Recon Squad, that light and Z-Power are one and the same, making the Psychic Dragon Pokemon the true source of the otherworldly energy in Alola. More accurately, this refers to Ultra Necrozma, the form the Pokemon takes while holding its signature Z-Crystal and undergoing the process of Ultra Burst. In this shape, the legendary Pokemon regains a portion of its former power, rearranging the parts of its body into a draconic vessel. Usually, Necrozma lies instead into a darkened state, which the Pokédex addresses as being the result of impurities accumulating inside its crystal-like flesh after long periods of abstinence from eating light, the ultimate source of its energy. Concept arts and leaked design files better show the process. Necrozma can absorb light through a photoreceptor organ on the back of its head, it's like a camera, and then gathers it in a central structure called brain prism. This then converts light into energy for activity, also functioning as an advanced thinking circuit, which grants the Pokemon high intelligence. Oh, Cerebral plus Ultra, I get it now. As impurities accumulate in the brain prism, its white color slowly becomes colored until it darkens completely, and that is what happens to most of its body in the regular form. In a way, Z-Crystals function the same way, fragments on the greater prism contaminated with the energies of types or specific Pokemon, hence assuming a different tonality. At this point, it won't come as a shock that Necrozma must also be related to one of the giants as the god ruling over Z-Power, and its acquaintance with types is revelatory in this regard. I'm even going to support this as Ultra Necrozma is effectively its own god. It is the center of the universes in which it comes from, or rather, ultra space in which it comes from. In the anime, we see that its light gives life and is necessary for other worlds, such as what we see specifically with Poipol's and Naganadell's world. Meanwhile, we see that many other Pokemon, they may be affected by it, at least directly, as we've talked about, but we don't know how their worlds have been directly affected by it, like we did with Poipol's world. Pheromosa's world wasn't a pure desert, and it was affected by the light. Maybe it was too close to Necrozma or Ultra Necrozma and effectively dried out. Meanwhile, places further away, which would be an antithesis to Pheromosa because they are opposites, Buzzwole's world was just far away enough with plenty of water, thus creating the perfect jungle environment for something like Buzzwole to become a thing. And what's interesting is that Pheromosa does potentially try to attract mates with its own pheromones, suggesting that there are other creatures on its planet that aren't Pheromosa, or at least that there are male versions, assuming that all Pheromosa are female, considering I believe that none of the Ultra Beasts have any gender. Indeed, Z crystals can also be used to change Arceus' form, although bearing no effect on judgment, effectively functioning as plates facsimiles. In this case, there are no ambiguities on what type the original giant embodied. True to their namesake, psychic type, Esper type, Pokemon are able to use the power of their minds to perform psychokinesis or other forms of mind bending. For this reason, the type was appropriately classified as a special one before Generation 4, and Pokemon under this label tend to excel in special attack and special defense. This isn't to say some of its moves don't involve physical contact. Zen Headbutt and Psychic Fans, Psychic Fangs, not physical fans, are just two prominent examples, but the scales are definitely tipped on the other side. Striking with invisible mental blows can be fatal even for the strongest enemy, which is why Psychic types' moves aren't very effective against those aware of the opponent's mind tricks, Psychic types itself, for example, and the immovable Steel typing, though this resistance was probably added to balance the game back in Generation 2, as Ken Sugimori addressed on Nintendo Power 134 in July of 2000. The only drawback in resorting so much on the power of your mind is that losing focus also loses, or rather lowers, your effectiveness in battle. Neurodivergent people everywhere, specifically those with ADHD, unable to concentrate, yeah, we're screwed. Which is why attacks that inspire fear and dread, such as with Ghost-type moves, can result in severe damage. From a cosmological perspective, Psychic type is obviously associated with consciousness, which Necrozma also reinterprets as light. Photons interacting with our receptors, after all, grant us one of the most fundamental senses we possess to understand the world around us, and so to gain knowledge: sight. There are also other subcategories that often pertain to Psychic. Most importantly, the sphere of outer space, cosmic power, dreams, Dream Eater, hypnosis and rest, and magic, the kind that bends reality in secluded spaces with their own rules in moves such as Magic Room, Trick Room, Wonder Room, Magic Coat, and Magic Powder, rather than the natural magic of fairies, making them distinctly different. Some of these require their own separated focus, and will not indulge on them here. However, it can be broadly imagined that the Giant of Psychic must have represented these aspects as it emerged from its seat of life, perhaps bringing in high form of consciousness into the life forms it interacted with. If it also functioned as a light bringer is trickier to say. The one bestowed by Necrozma is specifically Z power, not light as a whole. Photons, after all, must have existed since Dialga and Palkia's wish. How these were integrated in the system of the young universe may be where the Titan had more freedom to intervene. It is suspicious, after all, that despite its limited domain over the light it can gift, the Prism Pokemon can nonetheless absorb all there is from the world, not just the one originating from it. Why does Necrozma even need light as an energy source? Perhaps that is a biological trait inherited by the Giant of Psychic. And if its body feasted on photons, then it is possible it came to regulate its flow. After souls, heat, electric charges, and the first chemical bonds, all the right conditions for planets to aggregate from cosmic dust were made manifest. But that also required heat to be redirected to their surface, so that energy could be periodically replenished. That needs a virtually inexhaustible source. Stars were the solution to the problem, and those emit light. Did the Giant of Psychic perhaps come up with their design? Naturally, this would require Necrozma's original planet to be an oddity, just like those preceding it, in the absence of stars filling the cosmos. Fortunately, we may have seen its remnants. Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon introduced the Ultra Space as a proper dimensional space connected to different worlds through Ultra Wormholes. While the term was used in Sun and Moon to refer to Ultra Deep Sea, this reveals to be a misinterpretation from the Aether Paradise's behalf, mistaking one of the worlds for the corridor in between. While the nature of this space is never addressed in the games, one report from the Aether Foundation posits Cosmog
as likely originating from here. Cosmog is hypothesized to be a type of Ultra Beast that hails from another dimension, a dimension that we have named Ultra Space. When placed under sufficient stress, it reveals the power to create and open Ultra wormholes in order to escape from its suffering. This makes sense, as the little nebula has developed the ability to open Ultra wormholes, probably as it grew acquainted with the rifts in Ultra Space. Leaked design files also confirm that traveling to other worlds is part of its life cycle. It is only when it evolves into Cosmoem that its evolutionary path gets decided, based on the amount of sunlight and moonlight it harvested in the universe it reached, allowing it to evolve into either Solgaleo or Lunala. And to support this, I'm gonna say, even without the leaked files, it is canonical that Lunala and Solgaleo came to our world, beat the ever-loving out of all 4 of the Tapus, and then discharged all their babies and said, hey, protect these are necessary, and then dipped. I forget where I get that from, and I really need to resource that when I talk about that in their own video one day. Either way, then the 2 legendary Pokemon will travel to worlds where Sun and Moon are balanced, where they mate so that a new Cosmog can drift elsewhere and seal its fate once more. Whether or not it's a Pokemon from this world is a mystery. If Cosmog managed to open Ultra wormholes due to its original birthplace in Ultra Space, then the same should be questioned for Necrozma. The two surely aren't related, or rather unrelated, I apologize. In its search for light, the Prism Pokemon can attach to Solgaleo and Lunala's bodies to absorb the bright energy they produce, assuming the forms of Duskmane Necrozma and Dawnwings Necrozma, respectively. This doesn't necessarily mean the 3 are related in their origin, but the pair at least serve as suitable batteries. An interview with Kazumasa Iwao, published on Pokemon Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon Edition, the official National Pokédex, further clarifies that the light produced by the legendary Pokemon exceeds Necrozma's requirement, inducing its berserk state. The same interview also specifies that the trio struggles against one another in Ultra Space, confirming they all belong to the same interdimensional ecosystem. Ooh, those are magic words to my ears. Oh, because I've always said that the whole reason Solgaleo and Lunala do what they do is because that way they can feed Necrozma again. It reaches a power beyond what its need, and as the battery depletes, it's still serving to keep the ecosystems of other worlds alive until eventually it runs out and has to eat another one of them again or absorb an excess amount of power all over again and attain that form all over again, repeating this interdimensional ecosystem cycle that they have. Why is it that 2 creatures from Ultra Space bear the capacity to emit more light than the one in the entire universe, which Necrozma can easily consume as depicted in Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon? Perhaps they are all connected to the original ruler of light. Iwao's direct quote states, as a result, and even though it really only needed a small amount of energy, Necrozma comes to gain a huge amount of energy beyond what Necrozma itself anticipated when it captures Solgaleo or Lunala. And because of excessive amount of energy, Necrozma goes berserk. These 3 are only struggling against one another in Ultra Space. Necrozma might steal the light of the others and flee, then Solgaleo and Lunala might give and take back the light. And on it would go. If multiple life forms arose in Ultra Space, it is implied that a seed of life took roots inside it. Depending on if the multiverse existed back then, or if it only unfolded after Palkia's rebellion, this space might have not even been connected to other worlds yet, more simply representing a liminal border of the universe physically separated from other dimensions, while not preventing wormholes to connect different planes to the same reality. As to how and why a Lake Trio would have slipped outside the material world, recall that this wouldn't be the only case, as Chaos likely took notice of the giants as the spirit invaded the distortion world. It is perfectly feasible then for the giant of Psychic to have emerged in another dimension. During Ultra Warp Ride, we can even see large chunks of unrefined bluish rocks, far too many to belong to the Soul Necrozma. It is as if a larger celestial body once existed in Ultra Space, only remnants visible today. If Cosmog and its evolutions were firstly born on this planet, it also explains their relation with Necrozma and with Ultra Beasts. Despite occasionally being classified as such, both lack the defining beast boost, yet share with them a peculiar sound effect in their cries. This apparent contradiction, however, is explained if neither Necrozma nor Cosmog needed to adapt to Z power later bestowed to their worlds. They lived alongside that energy from the very beginning, using it to mold space-time rather than as an energy source. And if the Giant of Psychic also ruled over light, then it is expected that its spawn would also produce it at an incredible rate. As for the role of the Giant in the setting, it should be noted how it likely grew acquainted with its brethren well before the war. Z power reflects the energies of types as if light passing through a prism, and that requires at least a minimal form of manipulation of other essences. It makes sense, after all, that the type standing in for knowledge and consciousness would be more predisposed to investigate the mysteries of creation. At the very least, we know it visited the planet of the original dragon at some point, as Beldum also gains the psychic typing. The TM for Psyshock can even be retrieved in the Giant Chasm. The strict resemblance of Z moves to Mega Evolution also betrays relations with the Giant of Fairy, perhaps the latter modeled after the former. The icon for a Mega Evolution Pokemon, or Mega Evolve Pokemon after all, is a rainbow-colored DNA. If the genetic aspect was inherited from the Giant of Ice, then the added light, giving the rainbow, the zenith, which breaks the limit, may have been the Giant of Psychic's personal touch. Be it something it was aware of or not, we can't tell. Depending on when Solgaleo and Lunala gained their types, a contact with Steel and Ghost is also required, even if only indirectly. Obviously, all this necessitates Necrozma to be a mere fraction of the original Giant. If it truly had domain over light as a concept, it surely doesn't anymore beyond Z power, and Ultra Space currently lies in the dark. After the war, its body must have been repurposed by Arceus into the benevolent Lightbringer of the ancient stories, not too dissimilarly from the original dragon. With the multiverse unfolded, its role may have been to shine into realities where life struggled to thrive, and due to its ability to open Ultra wormholes, it remains impossible to determine its world of origin. Even as Ultra Necrozma, its body appears to be mostly incomplete, only parts of the armor gathering around the brain prism, perhaps the only organ which truly remained intact from the primordial creature. But despite its immense power, the fact Arceus didn't get rid of it completely, like it did with the god of Mega Evolution, suggests a closer relation between the two. I've always personally suggested that Necrozma, or rather Ultra Necrozma, is the light when God said, "Let there be light," and it, spawned into existence, may have stolen some of that light to become what it was, only to run out eventually. After all, both Unknown and the Lake Trio will inherit that psychic type, indicating a certain degree of collaboration. If the two ever considered themselves as friends, Arceus and this other deity, this psychic god, then the deity's rage during the war must have mixed with sorrow. In a way, it was fortunate that other monsters were simply as such. Hand of Decay. Among all the inferences covered in this article, Generation 8 makes the easiest case. As already addressed, the legendary Pokemon Eternatus borrows its category as the gigantic Pokemon from Regigigas, allowing us to draw a parallel from the Giant of Earth and others in the cosmos. The Pokédex confirms it also arrived on the planet inside a meteor in ancient times, and so to those slayed in the creation myth. All previous assertions only make sense in the light of Eternatus' nature, and that was meant to be even more obvious in cut content. It was inside a meteorite that fell 20,000 years ago. There seems to be a connection between this Pokemon and the Dynamax phenomenon, as stated within the games. According to very early drafts of Sword and Shield setting, the Pokemon that will later be rethought as Eternatus was supposed to be a great quote-unquote giant, which grew more and more in the Primordial Age as it feasted on Pokemon, ruling over them as a tyrant, which would make a lot of sense as to why Calyrex being a ruler was such a big deal in the canon lore then. It was a king that was brought onto the throne after overthrowing a tyrant. Though back to that cut lore, eventually its body would have either perished under its own weight or defeated by 3 Pokemon, entrusting wisdom, courage, and confidence into the others. 8 of its bones would have then scattered along the regions, creating rivers and forests where life could flourish. All these aspects relate to either the Black Giant from Pokemon Myth 2 or Reek in Masuda's mythological document, meaning developers intended to actively reuse materials from Generation 4 on the Gigantomachy. And while this was eventually toned down, the implication remains that Eternatus is merely a part of something greater, as the state of Eternamax, Infinite Dynamax, it assumes in the final battle is much reminiscent of a severed hand animated by an energy core, while also having the highest base stat total among any Pokemon known to date. From the description of the signature move Eternabeam, we also know this to be its original form, meaning that what we normally see is merely the shape of the Pokemon while in energy deficit. This is Eternatus' most powerful attack. In short, Eternatus is the single creature closest to a full-fledged giant in the whole franchise. Not a chimera, nor a repurposed vessel, but an actual major part of the original body, seemingly still retaining echoes of its will. While not strictly malevolent, it even demonstrated its wish to peacefully coexist with humans and Pokemon in Masters EX, Eternatus doesn't show any intent of collaboration with Arceus like the original dragon, nor did it ever take a benevolent role like Necrozma. At least before the events of the games, the only thing that concerns it is self-preservation, as its core absorbs the energy of the land around it to stay active, while slowly pouring out its own as a byproduct. This exchange is why Galar became eventually soaked with its essence. The Galar particles emanated from the slumbering giant and used as an energy source to supply the whole region. It is a poison, a thing that takes something that already exists and corrupts it into a new energy that replaces the natural world, the natural energy that already exists. The core in its chest absorbs energy emanating from the lands of the Galar region. This energy is what allows Eternatus to stay active. Occasionally referred to as Dynamax energy, Dynamax power, Galar particles represent sword and shield equivalents of past powers, Mega Power, and Z Power. Like the previous two counterparts, this energy can also unlock a new hidden potential within a Pokemon invested by it, triggering the Dynamax phenomenon. Borrowing the Japanese name from that of its true shape, the power of Eternatus makes the Dynamax Pokemon tremendously grow in size, as well as considerably increase its health. Additionally, the moves of those undergoing this transformation are changed into more powerful max moves, based on their type, save for status moves, all turned into the defensive Max Guard. While this is reminiscent of Z moves, Gigantamax, Kyodamax, seems to draw inspiration from Mega Evolution instead, as a temporary transformation which changes the Pokemon's appearance depending on the activation of a certain Gigantamax factor. The difference is this sequence isn't shared among all members of a species, and as it can't be inherited by breeding, it doesn't seem to be genetic in nature. Instead, Pokemon bathed in Dynamax energy for prolonged periods of time seem to be able to occasionally develop the ability to Gigantamax, and that has been used to artificially replicate the process. In any case, this still has its own parallels with Necrozma's power, as Gigantamax Pokemon have access to exclusive G-Max moves, much like specific Z crystals in Alola. In a way, it can be argued for Dynamax to be a sum of all chaotic energies up to this point, especially in regard to battle gimmicks. Here, the beneficial effect on the Pokemon becomes one with the gigantism only sporadically displayed for the others, which may indicate the original ruler of this power to be particularly large even among its own kind. Cut content reveals giants resulting from Dynamax-based mutations were at some point planned as boss battles, much like Rogue Mega Evolutions and Total Pokemon, and I would have loved that. Even space-time distortions are blended in the mechanic. In fact, not only Eternamax causes rifts in reality during the final fight, the Pokédex addresses this as an effect of the energy exuding from its enlarged core, but Dynamax itself is described as a process warping space around the Pokemon to make them appear bigger than they truly are. Developers have similarly commented how it is better to think of Dynamax as a projection separate from the actual Pokemon, even though that has to be somehow able to interact with physical matter given the impact of their moves and of their own bodies on the ground. And if the same process also affects time other than space, it may be even explained why some Gigantamax forms show unnatural or futuristic designs, namely Duraludon growing to resemble a skyscraper. This transformation is causing such a warp in time and space that they draw forms from different timelines, much like what we see in the, well, I was about to say final generation, but generation 9. A form of space-time distortion also appears to manifest in Pokemon dens, special power spots in which the energy of Eternatus running through the land's veins gathers in the form of Galar particles. In these locations, inhabited by wild Pokemon, Dynamax is allowed to last seemingly indefinitely for those acquainted to the environment. While the transformation usually runs out after merely 3, showing to be less stable than Mega Evolution. Pokemon can be lured inside the dens by the use of a wishing piece, or wishing clump, while cut content shows smaller wishing chips, or wishing fragments, were planned to bear the same function at a higher cost, as even mentioned in unused dialogues. When a Pokemon finds its way in, a ray of purple light pointed towards the sky will signal their Dynamaxing, allowing trainers to face the foe. Is it purple? Is it not magenta? Whatever. These max raid battles display the interior of the den as a gigantic arena with seemingly no view on the outside, meaning this is likely another pocket space created by distortions, much like what we see with Rogue Mega Evolution. At the very least, Dynamax energy is stated to equally put the target in a state of frenzy if improperly managed, to a point trainers must run away after 10 turns of battle to avoid serious danger. Which, that's exactly what happens during the darkest day every time it occurs, with some very bold exceptions, which would be with toxicity for some reason that we still don't know. The process through which Dynamax is triggered is also much reminiscent, albeit not identical, to Mega Evolution and Z moves. Other than the main source slumbering in the underground, Galar particles are emitted by wishing stars, stones holding a mysterious power that are later established to be small fractions of Eternatus' body. Given the similar name and properties, it is safe to bet that wishing pieces share the same nature. This mechanism has been used as the basis for the Dynamax Band, a wishing star-powered device capable of regulating the flux of Galar particles toward a specific Pokemon in the proximity of a power spot. I think you know where this is going. The role of the star in the transformation, then, is similar to a keystone or a sparkling stone, as Dynamax energy is already present in its raw form. However, no Megastones or Z Crystals are required, and the human end has the only role to safely divert the power to its proper target. Indeed, a bond between the Pokemon and its trainer isn't stated to be a fundamental aspect of the process, and natural occurring Dynamax is far more common than its counterparts. As expected, the high levels of Galar particles in the regions have also influenced flora in significant ways, and even more evidently than before. The Dyna Tree in Crown Tundra likely grew on top of a power spot, absorbing Dynamax energy through its roots. As it became taller and taller, its foliage and fruits turning purple in shade. Among its branches, a Dynamax Greedent can be encountered in a raid-like battle, confirming beyond any reasonable doubt the connection with Eternatus' power. I didn't know any of that. I feel like a fool from things I've said in the past. At the same time, Max mushrooms in the Isle of Armor have harvested enough Galar particles to the point Pokemon can develop G-Max factors through their consumption. And in the Pokemon world, fungi are more akin to plants than ours, which is a fact. I mean, look at Breloom, look at Amoonguss, look at Shiinotic. You know, even spirits of the forest like Calyrex displays a peculiar blue aura when Dynamaxed, almost as if trees are in some way able to absorb, refine, and purify Dynamax energy. That flora is not only linked, but also somewhat in contrast with Dynamax energy, is expected if we look at the Giant's original attribute. To no one's surprise, Poison-type Pokemon have developed techniques involving the use of toxins, venoms, and other poisonous substances. Generally well-balanced, they hide in their arsenal both moves dealing physical damage through venomous injections and ranged attacks diffusing poison through air or waves. For this reason, they can be tough opponents for fairy-type Pokemon living as one with the natural world, easily spoiled by uncleanliness and stagnation. On the contrary, the industrial world of Steel-type counters the corrosion even more than it does with Fey, its impenetrable shells preventing toxins to reach flesh. For the same reason, Poison-type moves aren't very effective against those adapted to their effects, such as Pokemon of the same type or Ethereal Ghosts. as a nod to the immunity one can build through intense training of body and mind, and as well as to the idea that psychokinetic powers can contribute to healing, or just intelligence means we make medicine to cure poison. Psychic type attacks also deal high damage to poison users. Perhaps not the strongest in types matchups, poison can still reveal to be a formidable challenge to overcome, especially under the tight grip of the homonymous status condition. Toxic. Thematically, many Pokemon in this category are tied to the fields of pollution, smog, clear smog, as well as acid, acid armor, corrosive gas, but in the case of Eternatus, this goes even beyond. The slumbering carcass functions as an energy supply for all the region thanks to its radiating core, making it more similar to a radioactive generator than a simple source of filth. In fact, it may be questioned why even allowing the spread of poison as a concept if it didn't also bring something beneficial. In this sense, the Giant of Poison may have moved its first steps as the embodiment of radiation, as well as of inevitable radioactive decay. Regardless of details, the gist of it is that a fundamental energy runs through toxic waste, and one that is extraordinarily powerful. Other details about the life of this giant before the war aren't easy to extrapolate, given how much of its existence can be inferred solely by its dismemberment. Currently, only one hand survives as a major chunk of the original body, Eternatus itself, which implies the rest may have been torn apart. Some may notice an oddity in how wishing stars are said to occasionally come from space even in modern times, something we experience ourselves in the games too, while the body from which they are supposed to split off rests below ground, or sealed away by Chairman Rose. This, however, was explained in one of Sword and Shield's early drafts. Pieces of Eternamax were supposed to pass through the space-time distortions the Fiend creates during the final fight, teleporting them to different eras as if falling from the cosmos. Are you telling me that the final fight then precedes the beginning of other universes within Sword and Shield because it sends pieces of itself off through space-time distortions, thus shooting them into other realities and starting the process all over again for other versions of itself? That's cool. Not that this excludes other chunks of the giant to have fallen independently from its palm. In fact, Tales of Gigantamax Melmetal in a distant region confirms a secondary source of Dynamax energy must exist on Earth. In a distant land, there are legends about a Cyclopean giant. In fact, the giant was a Melmetal that was flooded with G-Max energy. Moreover, Dynamax crystals paints an even more ominous picture. These event-exclusive items can trigger the encounter with a Dynamax Pokemon in a specific power spot in the wild areas. The existence of such artifacts isn't weird, following the usual trend of spontaneous crystallization of chaotic energies. What is more interesting is their nomenclature, how they are named. While only 12 were made available among the 300 coded in-game, all are named after a real-world star from a specific constellation. Hold on. Kiskeym told me specifically that he needed to change this, and the implications don't change anything, but allow me to read exactly what they told me, and it is, for future note, in case I don't update it in time, when you go to the Eternatus section, I make the case for Dynamax crystals to come from the constellations they are named after. However, they made me notice this nomenclature is more properly used to describe objects coming from the direction of a constellation rather than from there specifically. It doesn't change the implication, but that's something that they need to correct. So they're about to talk about how the crystals are associated with Andromeda and Sagittarius and with data for 55 more, but ultimately, instead of it being from them, it came from that direction, allowing us to basically make a map indirectly, or directly as you will, of where all these crystals came from. Did they come directly north, south, east, west, and ultimately those are not really relative to anything when you're talking about the 3D, planet that the Earth is, but I think you get the idea of it. What vastness of space did this come from? That being the case, Dynamax energy would be widespread across the universe, even beyond the Milky Way. Is this simply the result of the Giant of Poison's body being scattered across the cosmos, or perhaps its expansion dates back to the Age of Giants? It is fitting for the ruler of both Toxins and Dynamax to expand its influence more and more, spreading like metastatic tissue wrapping itself across the very stars. It's a cancer. It's a cancer, literally a cancerous Pokemon that, I mean, it's based on radiation, so yeah, that makes perfect sense. In that case, Chaos may have simply sped up a rebellion that would have come regardless, as the mightiest of giants would have inevitably desired to engulf the world all for itself, or even the universe, just like the myths from Diamond and Pearl development. Is this more violent attitude that led Dynamax to assimilate traits of other powers, twisting Mega Evolution and Z moves, depriving them of the mutual bond required for Dynamax's realization? The exact truth may have been lost to time and space, but the mighty champion eventually met its match. As its flesh was torn apart, we can only imagine if it simply continued to act like a beast, or if it regretted its actions even a little. The existence of Eternatus means it wasn't completely eliminated, so there may be something to salvage deep within its heart. Not enough for its destiny to be any different from being locked inside a cage of rock floating in outer space, or perhaps its essence was too persistent to eradicate, so that one injured piece on the verge of death simply managed to float away, patiently waiting to strike once more. One above all. In their own way, Sword and Shield represented a climax for the unspoken scenario of the defeated giants. From a single mention in Diamond and Pearl, we were only given small contextual clues to latch on until Eternatus laid down the connections between the gods of power and the original story more explicitly than ever. At the same time, the former giant of poison embodied a power more destructive than all its predecessors, culminating in a fight with the strongest creature ever faced in the franchise. Generation 9 had 3 options for how to follow up on Eternamax: focus on something other than the giants, return to less powerful titans still left unexplored, or continue in the escalation. In many ways, it chose the last one. The region of Paldea is characterized by the presence of terrestrial energy, particularly concentrated in the depths of the great crater at its center, and the Area Zero inside. Much like analogous powers in previous generations, this also tied to the generation's battle mechanic, namely, terrestrialization. Pokemon affected by this process have their types changed into a hidden Terra type, usually determined at birth, while also not losing their original stabs. What the process does then is to temporarily draw out a hidden attribute from its target, superimposing it into its usual categorization without completely erasing it. From a visual standpoint, a terrestrialized Pokemon coats itself in a sparkling glass-like texture, while a Terra Jewel appears on the top of its head to mark its individual Terra type. As stated in the respective descriptions, these clumps of crystallized energy can occasionally leave Terra shards behind at their shattering, usually when a terrestrialized Pokemon faints during a fight. Once again, these powers tend to assume a solid shape, each kind of shard holding the essence of a certain type, to the point they can be used to artificially change a Pokemon's Terra type, not too dissimilarly to how G-Max factors can be awakened at high concentration of Eternatus' energy. Terrestrialization reacts differently if the target grows acquainted with its presence. On rare occasions, these shards form when a Terra Pokemon falls in battle and its Terra Jewel shatters. The way the process is catalyzed is also more similar to Dynamax than Mega Evolution or Z moves. Terra Orbs are Pokeball-like devices containing a small crystal made from terrestrial energy. Concept arts show how the jewel is normally stored in the upper part of the sphere, falling down below when an activation button is pressed. Here, the core of the Terra Orb gathers energy from the environment and powers the crystal, which is then converted to plasma and directly toward the Pokemon to trigger the transformation. The principle is akin to wishing stars manipulating a pre-existing flux of Galar particles, hence it only requires a catalyst from one end and not both ends, the Keystone Megastone idea. And as terrestrial energy is far more widespread than Dynamax energy in their respective regions, wild terrestrialized Pokemon have appeared all over the land. Other than those roaming around, however, some Pokemon also gathered around large, hollow crystals made of terrestrial energy, strengthening the resilience of their Terra Jewels. Much like for Pokemon dens in Galar, trainers can engage in Terra raid battles in the attempt to catch these foes, before a wave of energy forces them to flee. The crystalline structures change in color depending on the host's Terra type, except for those where the concentration of terrestrial energy is higher than usual, turning them darker and surrounding them with an ominous aura. Wow, okay, I never realized the connection that could then have to Necrozma and Ultra Necrozma. As the interior is also clearly larger than the exterior, with reflections of the Pokemon appearing all over the den's walls, it seems space-time distortions also contribute to create these pocket arenas. It is superfluous at this point to note that this also checks all the boxes of a giant's power, coherently so. Terrestrialization seems to serve as ideal seabed for flora, from the crystal flowers blocking the path to Area 0 underdepths, the lowest level of Area 0, to the emergence of the miraculous Herba Mystica, or secret spice. The legendary Pokemon Ogerpon, a plant-based lifeform, also reacts peculiarly to terrestrialization. Ogerpon mention makes everyone's day better, uniquely changing its appearance and ability. Once again, the Plant Kingdom shows to be both particularly akin and resistant to chaotic energy, much like it happened with Dynamax and Galar. Consumption of Herba Mystica even triggers gigantification. The affected Titan Pokemon, Leader Pokemon, they're also called Leader Pokemon in that too? Wow, it really changes in translations. Sharing the original name, albeit written differently, oh, that explains it, and a similar aura with Alola's totem Pokemon. Area 0 was home to wondrous herbs that instantly impart vigor when eaten. We dubbed them Herba Mystica and attempted to grow some in areas around Paldea. However, before we could harvest, the herbs were eaten by Pokemon, which in turn grew large and strong. We called these Titan Pokemon. In the lower levels of the Underdepths, we even come across a peculiar great tree. Given the lack of proper flora in the surroundings, it is likely that this is a tree-shaped crystal more than a crystallized tree, although it is also possible to have sprouted from a genuine seed that fell down through the cracks of the earth. In that case, its main source of sustenance would have been nothing more than terrestrial energy itself, making this specimen not too dissimilar from the Entry or the Dynatree. Moreover, life forms akin to the flora also emerged in this same area, which it would make sense when everything opens up. You get all the trees that stand above it, that eventually seeds would have flown down or been dropped down or carried amongst any of the Pokemon that would have been at least in the past forms, if the future forms aren't eating or messing with any of the natural world whatsoever. Glimmet and Glimmora are described as Pokemon made of petals of crystallized poison energy, and according to the Pokédex, their composition is much alike Terra Jewels. Considering their massive presence in Area 0, and that Glimmet crystals are needed to craft the TM for Terra Blast, a move allowing the user to offensively channel terrestrial energy against the target, it's clear these flowers are none other than sentient clusters of that same power. Maybe the great tree in the Underdepths is where Glimmet flowered for the first time, but what is sure is that they eventually spread even beyond Area 0, and the specimens gathered around Kitakami's Crystal Pool, another land characterized by the presence of terrestrialization, demonstrating that they can be born even from smaller sources. This does beg the question of why poison type seems to be favorited in this kind of sentient crystallization. Glimmet and Glimmora are poisonous flowers in all effects, nests of filth and uncleanliness, to a point they're the only Pokemon to possess the ability Toxic Debris Scattered Poison, spreading poison spikes in its surroundings. Maybe the crystals are just more inclined to harvest such toxins, which would put into perspective their true nature. Penny notices how the Zero Lab has currently been swallowed by the minerals, their expansion seemingly engulfing everything on their path. Like a growing tumor, terrestrial energy slowly proceeds to gnaw the world around it, even making its way outside Area 0 in the form of dens. Appropriately, that same greed had only been seen in the Giant of Poison. Yet, while terrestrialization and Dynamax are undoubtedly close to one another, there isn't an exact identity between the two. Investigating the former's source can shed some light on the mystery. The legendary Pokemon Terapagos was once a common creature that lived in ancient Paldea. According to the Pokédex, it can even be of both genders, despite the only specimen we can catch is granted to be male. Eventually, all but one went extinct after being caught in seismic shifts, shaking the region in prehistory. Given the formation of the Underdepths coincides with the survivor falling from above, the species must have roamed around well before 2 million years ago, the date currently attributed to the genesis of the underground cavity. It surely is fitting that Terapagos' internal name is Kodaikame, literally meaning ancient turtle. The planet the first Terapagos lived on was an unwelcoming place. At the time, the never-ending clashes between Groudon and Kyogre were still frequent, and largely influenced the atmospheric conditions of the world, even denying their presence locally. It is only natural for life forms from this era to develop strategies to survive the harshest conditions. According to the Pokédex, Terapagos owns the ability to convert energy into hard crystals. It is worth noticing that never is it stated this pertains to terrestrial energy specifically. Before encountering a much greater source of power, these turtles likely absorbed all types of elemental energies to harden their shells in defense from enemies. Sea predators were no match for a carapace imbued with the power of lightning. If a being of flames attempted to strike, the crystals could have always been powered with water, and so on. It was a perfect trait in a world filled with elemental energies like the super ancient past. We may even have traces of this early mineralization. Among type-enhancing items, gems are by far the most underutilized. These crystals were firstly introduced in Generation 5 as one-time boosters, one per each of the 17 types back then available. Despite not being legally obtainable, a fairy gem was added in the code of later iterations. The exact origin of such gems is never addressed, but we find them mostly among the dust of caves and other mountainous areas in Unova. You would expect as such from minerals, but how do they end up imbued with all kinds of essences, these typings, including those so distant from a rocky environment? Factor Terapagos and its type crystallization ability, and the existence of these items becomes less far-fetched. like the bird. While we don't find jewels in Paldea, this is coherent with its apparent lack of relics from prehistory. Moreover, the possibility of ancient Terapagos once existing as a regular Pokemon in environments far from Paldea is directly mentioned by developers in leaked internal meetings. Normal gems also seem to be more frequent in nature. We can loot them from various rocks in Hoenn, in Kalos' Terminus Cave, on Route 15 of Alola, and on Route 9 of Galar, while the other variants of the other typings are completely absent outside Unovan borders. Since Terapagos is a normal type, we should expect its default crystallization to be the most abundant, the normal crystal or gem. What we do find in Paldea are the bluish crystals imbued with terrestrial energy, in overgrowing numbers as we approach Area Zero's epicenter, which also happens to be Terapagos' resting place. The Pokemon is indeed repeatedly addressed as the source of their power, Briar going as far as claiming its very essence is rooted in it. This isn't to say this connection always existed. At a basic level, this is the same process described for other jewels. The turtle absorbs a certain kind of energy and converts it into a solid form, which is very similar to defeating rogue, mega evolved Pokemon, and that energy being given a solid form, all while enduring its shell accordingly. Leaked discussions between developers confirm Terapagos was considered an ordinary turtle in the times before Area Zero existed. In other words, at some point, the Pokemon had to come in contact with an independent source of terrestrial energy in order to become its incarnation, the one we know today. Matsushima said, in the past it was viewed as an ordinary turtle. Its rarity was established in the setting because of the emergence of Area Zero, which would also play into its population and having a higher population. The professor's journals in the Underdepths address the current state of Terapagos, dormant after its body crystallized when it came in contact with a mysterious source of power. This hardening is described as a mere natural reaction, a way to protect itself from external threats. This is again no different from the species' usual behavior, but this time it evidently changed its form indefinitely. In all likelihood, that source is represented by the power of Stellar type. This peculiar essence is a true mixture of everything, granting the user a boost on each of the existing types, notably only one time per each, in a process mirroring that of consumable gems. As moves in this category are super effective against terrestrialized opponents, Stellar type appears to be tied to the phenomenon. Indeed, Terrastal, original name, can be equally read as Terrasta, in a more obvious thematic nod. All because L is not pronounced as la or in Japanese, it's ra, so Terrastar. I felt like I put a Spanish twist on that. Similarly, Sutera type is an anagram of Terasu type. The stellar remnants were a virtually infinite spring of energy to crystallize, and this highly affected Terapagos' physical state. The ancient turtle became littered with the bluish jewels, shaping its shell and growing both on its legs and on top of its head. More importantly, it became one and the same with the terrestrial phenomenon, gaining the ability Terra Shift, otherwise directly translated as Terra Change. The treasure and the stellar Terra type. In English, we get, a massive cavern exists beneath Area Zero, and there slumbers Terapagos, the hidden treasure of Area Zero. Its body has become crystal, protecting it from hostile outsiders. It appears that rousing it will take some time. In this cavern, I have witnessed the terrestrial phenomenon occurring in a way I've never seen above ground. Terrestrialization that appears to hold the power of every known type. I have dubbed this Terra type, the stellar type for now. Could Terrapagos' influence be at play? Meanwhile, in Japanese, we directly translate to, there is a huge cavern below Area 0, and in the deepest part lies Terrapagos, the dormant secret treasure of Area 0. Its body becomes crystal to protect itself from external threats. Looks like it'll take some time to awaken. Could it be the influence of Terrapagos? Inside the vast cavity, a terrestrial phenomenon that has never been seen on the surface is occurring. A terrestrial that houses all types. I will provisionally name this Terra type Stellar. Absorbing the energy around it, Terrapagos could now alter its body to reach its terrestrial form. Upon sensing hostilities, the Pokemon's shell undergoes a second crystallization that unravels the hidden potential of a being encompassing all types. Their essences physically manifesting on its plates. This is reflected by the signature ability, Terra Shell, which allows it to absorb any attack when the Pokemon is undamaged, protecting it from moves of all kinds. Additionally, the Pokemon gains the ability to uniquely terrestrialize in its stellar form. In this enhanced state, the Pokemon creates a surrogate of its regular body at its top, mirrored by the more common Terra Jewels of standard Terra Pokemon. On the opposite side, a semisphere with gems of all types floating around in circle appears below its feet, and more importantly, it gains the Stellar type. The connection between Stellar and Terrestrial is self-evident, and it serves as a proper explanation for the gimmick's rule over all types. But if this is true, the next question also comes as naturally. Since Stellar-type Pokemon do not seem to exist in nature, how did Terrapagos manage to make a contact with its raw form? According to the professor's journals, Area 0 Underdepths, otherwise known as Great Zero Hollow, formed 2 million years ago when a filled space was suddenly hollowed. Localization states the cavern was once filled with many objects or creatures perhaps, but this is more the translation team's uncertainty than the author's. The translation is simply countless things, and nothing is spoken on the nature of such things, let alone if they were alive or inorganic. At some point, these things simply vanished, creating the first cavern. Later, it collapses, caused by tectonic activities, rainwater, and groundwater, and that is what gave the Underdepths their current layout. In English, we get, I am calling the area found below Area 0 the Area 0 Underdepths. From the composition of the rock, I would date the cavern's formation to 2 million years ago. There are indications that many objects, or creatures perhaps, filled the space prior to the current cavern's formation. The depths bottoms out approximately 3,300 feet below or beneath the surface. There are indications of numerous past cave-ins, likely resulting from tectonic activity and erosion caused by rainwater or groundwater, but it appears that the ground has remained stable since the last major cave-in. Meanwhile, in Japanese, in direct translation, we have the layer below Area 0 is called the Great Zero Hollow. Judging from the geological strata, this cavity was formed about 2 million years ago. There is evidence that countless things filled the hole just before it was formed. The depth of the depression is approximately 1,000 meters. There are traces of repeated collapses. The cause is probably tectonic activity, rainwater, and groundwater erosion. Since the last major collapse, the terrain has remained stable until the present. Given these countless things disappeared without a trace where we can now find a dormant Terrapagos, its fall down the earth is likely what triggered the hollowing. The Pokédex does affirm this species went extinct due to tectonic activities, and it appears one individual simply slipped in the cracks of the planet's crust and reached an energized end. After all, the ability Terraform 0, Zero Forming, is an allusion to its terraforming role in the formation of Area 0. Developers have indeed associated the extinction of Terrapagos with the formation of the crater, describing a population once existing on Mesogoza Mountain, Table Mountain, prior to the starting collapse that created it. The game's implying of its lowest depths specifically, and if a sole survivor is responsible for the things to disappear all while eventually touching a source of stellar-type energy, then these mysterious things were probably made of such power. Matsushima states, Terapagos itself was a Pokemon that lived on top of Mesogoza Mountain prior to the formation of Area Zero due to the starting collapse. It was an ordinary creature which might as well have existed in places with similar environments in other regions. With the Great Collapse that created Area Zero, its rarity was established in this setting. Logistically, this helps to explain how the presence of Terapagos influenced its surroundings. The original source remained secluded for who knows how many years, but the burst that carved the first cavity made it easier to leak from its new host. As the professor notices, the reason stellar-type terrestrialization occurs only near the crater's hypocenter, I'm going to assume that's supposed to be epicenter, is to search in Terapagos' own presence. While the more the crystals drift away from the main body, the more diluted their powers become. In fact, the jewels can be imagined as, all in all, extensions of the turtle's shell. That is why fragments can be caught inside a Terra Orb like an actual Pokemon, and why terrestrialization is always preceded by a sound font almost identical to Terapagos' cry. You may say they are almost like cells of a single gigantic organism, expanding more and more as they made their way outside their dome. Still, the nature of these things that constituted the original source is never elaborated further. Whether they were minerals or unidentified life forms, a massive stock of stellar material rested below the Earth, and a Terapagos just happened to come in contact and feast with it. What we can infer from environmental storytelling, however, is that their origin was likely extraterrestrial, and not just because the name Stellar and the signature move Terra Starstorm, Terra Cluster, are a clear allusion to outer space. Past a secret entrance in the underdepths we can only access after defeating a stellar Terra Garchomp, we can collect countless Terra Shards. Among them, 3 items stand out from the rest. A Premier Ball, celebrating this special finding, the TM for Terra Blast, and more importantly, that for Meteor Beam. The image evoked by such moves with Terra Shards all around is clear. The blizzard just outside the cave only reinforcing the obvious. Terrestrialization fell from space. Meteors often carrying ice and other frozen materials. It is possible that such energized things arrived billions of years ago on a young planet, well before Terapagos roamed in Paldea. We can't see evidence of meteoric strikes after the formation of the Great Crater, and for them to rest miles underground, strata must have piled up on top of one another until the stellar relics were completely buried. If so, these objects or creatures likely also originated from the remnants of a giant, much like the original dragon and Eternatus. Stellar type is an amalgamation of all other types, something surely akin to the primordial turmoil before creation that intermingled everything in one. A similar concept was presented in Legend Arceus with the introduction of the Legend Plate, an artifact imbued with the essences of all types. Given a star is engraved on its face and the items are permeated by the powers or former powers of giants, it seems that the energy of a stellar type titan is infused in this plate, and it just happens that a source of the same power is buried below ground. This is no coincidence. If Earth already existed at the time of the war, it is even possible the creature targeted the planet, predicting the future role the gods were outlining for its corner of the cosmos, as opposed to all the other giants whose carcasses roamed in outer space for billions of years before striking its surface. Alternatively, and perhaps more likely, it was simply buried under the crust well after its formation. Be it as it may, those countless things Terapagos absorbed may have been none other than byproducts of a divine corpse. Through the course of the game, Terapagos reveals to possess the most diverse powers. The obvious one is allowing terrestrialization to occur, either through the crystals inside our Terra Orbs, or naturally through the energy around it. A second means through which Terapagos affects reality is the distortion of space-time, and on far greater lengths than with Terra raid battles. As seen both through the Time Machine and at the Crystal Pool, the Pokemon can summon beings and objects from different timelines, effectively allowing multiversal travel. Given these crystals are merely parts of Terapagos' shell, such phenomenon can occur even far away from the main body. This is obvious for terrestrialization, but is also true for summoning. Rumors of people coming back from the dead in Kiskeym started well before the Pokemon left Area 0. In a vacuum, it may strike as odd that two powers so different from each other originate from the same source, but this is just the natural consequence of bringing the energy of giants to its limit. Having absorbed the power of chaos, a force that existed when everything was mixed as one, Tropicos became able to erase differences and confound the boundaries of reality. For instance, it can merge every type in a unifying stellar terrestrialization, or turn one elemental affinity to one another when its influence grows weaker at distance. In the same way, it can merge two different continuities into one. Simply speaking, Tropicos' powers can be reduced to a single word: convergence. Be it a type change from A to B or a man pulled from timeline X to Y, the legendary Pokemon always closes the gap between 2 points, nullifying the disparity of other worlds. The Giant of Stellar, at the start of it all then, is perhaps, more appropriately, a Giant of Chaos. The primordial soup itself, that which existed and was made up of everything and anything that existed before it separated. Given the legend plate isn't addressed as containing the essence of stars or analogous renditions, but simply as that of all creation, it is probably better to think of Stellar as an emergence property rather than as a type on its own. That being the case, the energy dwelling in the Underdepths is a mixture of attributes and powers from all the other giants, which is likely why Poison, as the most aggressive of them all, managed to gain the upper hand in its manifestation. One could even posit that the many things were actually residual parts of the chaotic spawns casted away in the underground. However, this would also make terrestrialization more difficult to frame as its own power. Even treating the process as emergent from Stellar, why is it that Tropicos didn't manage to draw out Z power or Mega power in the same way, if those were also irradiated by the singular components of the mixture? It seems then only some of the aspects carried by giants could be recovered from a singularity, namely the types. But if a singular entity ever embodied this amalgamation, then a true avatar of chaos is the one that fits the profile the most, a living embodiment of the primordial turmoil. After all, would be able to wield the powers of types fractured from its essence even in absence of a direct contact with its respective rulers. In fact, it would be the one bestowing those powers to them in the first place, whispering words of betrayal since the very day of their birth. And what better force to characterize such creatures other than the power to return everything to one, to make reality converge, to try and return it to the primordial soup. As for its ultimate demise, it may have met defeat without even leaving its throne. Those unseen. With Generation 9, we've reached the end of the road for all known gods of power. Pokemon, however, is an ongoing franchise, and we can't exclude for more to eventually be revealed in future installments. Types, after all, have not been exhausted, 8 of them still lacking their respective ruler, not counting the edge cases for Fairy and Stellar. We may even be able to infer something on their nature looking at their attributes. Among the missing energies, Grass type is among the most fascinating to explore. On the surface, this is simply the power running through the plant's kingdom. Its moves either consist of physical strikes with vines, wood, and blades of grass, or are performed by channeling the energy of flora. Energy Ball is one example. Many of these techniques play on the ability of roots to absorb nutrients from the ground, reinterpreted as stealing life force from other creatures to restore the user's health. Absorb, Mega Drain, Giga Drain, Leech Seed, Horn Leech. Its relations with other types are often quite on the nose in their rationale. Water-type Pokemon suffer from Grass-type attacks as plants use water as a substance to thrive, which is also why the former's moves aren't very effective against the latter. The same is also true for Grass and Electric, Wood being a poor electric conductor. On the defensive, they suffer instead the Flames of Fire, as well as low temperature induced by ice and, as anticipated, the toxins emanated by poison. While its attacks don't particularly shake them, Steel-type is also resistant to plant-based moves, circling back to their supremacy on the natural world of fairies. What is more interesting about the Giant of Grass is that its element seems to interact peculiarly with all other chaotic energies. Past powers, Mega Power, Dynamax Energy, Terrestrial Energy, and arguably Z-Power all feature plants, which manage to grow along their otherworldly effects. Moreover, it is significant that the form of a Tree of Life, which cut content further indicates having originated from a seed, was chosen to embody spirit taking over matter. Such structure must have first been manufactured by its ruler, and we may even know why its presence is so prominent. Recall that the Distortion World likely belonged to Chaos before it was bestowed to Giratina as a reward for its deeds during the conflict as a war god effectively. As previously elaborated, the inscription on Turnback Cave also affirms lives were lost in the dimension at some point, which indicates some of the giants took refuge here during the war. The ruler of Stellar, if it ever incarnated into a singular body, may have been one of them as the true avatar of chaos, but the original structure of this sentence makes clear the subjects are more than one. Finally, recall that chaotic forces started to manifest in the material world as the other side took notice of the spirit crossing over its boundaries. A seed of life did traverse the boundaries of reality to sprout into the foundations of the primeval turmoil, and what did it brought forth if not twisted plants? Then, the Giant of Grass may have been the first bad apple that put into motion the ultimate downfall of its own age, either born before or concurrently with the Giant of Ghost. This first guardian of the distortion world would have witnessed the types slowly emerging in the material world. As they detached from the heart of chaos, it grew dependent on. And as those essences departed, they were filtered by its presence from the very beginning, carrying the aspects of flora into the world without its ruler leaving its seat. Perhaps Arceus observed the mechanism behind plants only indirectly, noticing one of the seeds successfully departing from its original experiment, and then decided to incorporate its elements in the life-bringing arcs, sending seeds to each of these planets. One property of flora, after all, is its resilience. The spawns of the Giant of Grass still linger in the distortion world now that Giratina took its place, eternally resisting the odds. What was exactly of the main tree is something currently beyond our knowledge, but it too must have felled along the incarnation of chaos as its world was invaded. Following this train of thought, it is possible to investigate the current state of the distortion world in search of the giants that allegedly lost their lives here during the conflict. Other than plants, for example, the dimension is suspiciously full of water, which the flowers are presumably using to sustain themselves for so long in a realm of nothingness. Did the Giant of Water seek refuge here before Arceus broke through their reality? Then the backwards waterfalls we traverse may be nothing more than its blood, and if just an ounce of its will managed to survive through the medium, an attempt to reconnect with its body may serve as a mechanical explanation for Palkia's rebellion. That said, the only thing left in the dimension is bedrock. Despite embodying different powers, rock type and ground type have some overlaps both thematically and from a gameplay perspective. Their general distribution of stats is similar, with Pokemon often preferring a slow, physical approach to the battle, the former prioritizing the high defenses of their armors. Special moves nonetheless exist for both. For example, Rock resorts to energized projectiles, Power Gem, Meteor Beam, Ancient Power, while Ground can either cause controlled eruption through seismic shifts, Earth Power, or offensively employ Mud, Mud Bomb, Mud Shot, Mud Slap. Even their affinities are often similar to one another, with Ground prevailing over Rock as it can shake stone's foundation, causing earthquakes and other shifts. Both poor heat conductors, they can easily contrast fire types. Ground can also effectively neutralize toxins by dispersing them on the land, while Rock resists their attacks through their hard shells, albeit not as effectively as Steel. Both types also suffer from water and grass, softening their solid structures and taking roots on them. Where they significantly differ is their hardness, as Rock-type Pokemon only lose against Steel, but reign supreme over Ice. Even normal moves can hardly scratch them. On the contrary, Ground-type Pokemon gain an advantage against metals embedded in the earth, while suffering from ice responsible for glacial erosion. Finally, Electric-type moves are completely ineffective against the energy of the land, likely as a nod to the process of grounding. These are, in other words, similar energies, both ruling over different aspects of mineral aggregation. In a way, the real difference between the two lies in whether it is possible to distinguish the rock from the planet's bedrock. We emblematically see this with techniques manipulating sand. While Sand Attack, Sand Seer Storm, and Scorching Sands are classified as ground type, all it takes is for Sandstorm to use particles in the air to become a rock type move. The line between the two can be blurry, which makes you wonder if their respective giants weren't in any way related to one another. As speculated before, it is possible the aspects brought forth by this pair in an early universe pertained the aggregation of solids, adding ionic and covalent bonds to those brought forth by metals. Unfortunately, that is the extent of the conclusions we can draw with our current set of data. If anything, that a rocky pavement exists in the distortion world could mean that at least one of the two perished here. The platforms we walk on, its byproduct. Perhaps that is why chaotic energies tend to crystallize themselves, currently filtered by the footprints that it left on the other side of the world. Alternatively, that is a trait of the giants inherited when they were alive. It surely wouldn't be the only one. The original dragon, Necrozma, and Eternatus all partially share the dragon type, on top of the attribute they are supposed to incarnate. With generally high combat abilities both in attack and special attack depending on the species, these creatures are among the most fearful in the Pokemon world. They are, in many ways, counterparts to Fae, both taking inspiration from creatures of folklore, manipulating the arcane energies of nature. But while fairies embody the aspect of mystic harnessing flora, often with a gentle but sometimes mischievous disposition, dragons act on a more primal, animalistic form of magic. They are forces of nature rather than forces using nature, and that puts them at advantage against many elemental energies. They resist grass, fire, water, and electric alike. At the same time, however, they also expose themselves to the same kind of raw power, that of other dragons, but more importantly, that of fairies, against which their attacks are rendered useless. For the same reason, they also struggle against Steel type, which we already described as being particularly effective against Fairy type, while Ice likely pierces them through their scales, as they are usually imagined as cold-blooded reptiles, even if this isn't necessarily the case in the setting. Why is this attribute shared among the giants is impossible to say. Perhaps the giant of dragon willingly bestowed it amongst its brethren. Perhaps it divided its essence in some unspoken development in the middle of the conflict, resulting in its body to also disappear from sight. Or maybe one single giant never existed for this element, and it simply made its way among many from chaos. Until more is revealed, we can only wonder. Finally, there are types whose giants were simply never addressed or hinted at. One pair is given by Fighting type and Dark type. While English localization focuses on the darkness aspect of the latter, this is only tangentially related to the type, whose Pokemon tend to live in the shadows to conceal their presence from their preys. More accurately, evil types, these creatures are usually snarky, mischievous, if not outright malevolent, resorting to all types of tricks and ploys to win a fight. That is why they function as a counterpart to the Fighting type, embodying martial arts as a pure and fair form of combat, occasionally standing for heroism. That is why their moves are super effective against the so-called forces of evil, although they can land poorly against the other powers, preventing their bodies to retain a healthy state, such as poison. Indeed, Fighting type is mostly physical in nature, with only sporadic forms of energy manipulation in the forms of Aura Sphere, Focus Blast, Vacuum Wave, Final Gambit, and Secret Sword, for example. For this reason, their attacks are able to pierce through all sorts of defenses, from those of the frail normal type to the armors of rock, ice, and steel. At the same time, they suffer a ranged approach, particularly from those conscientiously manipulating magic and the mind, fairy, and psychic, and they are completely useless against incorporeal enemies like ghost-type Pokemon. On the contrary, dark-type moves can neutralize psychic and ghost at ease, shackling mind and soul alike in their evil schemes. Psychokinesis is even neutralized completely by life forms manipulating this element, meaning the primal fear they inspire is even stronger than that toward phantoms, against which they appropriately resist. The same goes for other dark-type moves, less effective against those that know of the dirty tactics and are willing to use them themselves. Fighting and Fairy balance the picture as their counterparts, both embodying stereotypically benevolent forces. Indeed, that giants existed for these concepts may have some serious implications on the laws of reality. If good and evil are forces of creation, what does it say about the foundations of the moral sphere? Are there objective rules telling right and wrong apart? Or perhaps these are just labels we arbitrarily attach to them? Truth to be told, spin-offs may have offered a glimpse on at least one of these beings, which may give more insights on their true nature, but this is a matter for another time. Last but not least, Bug type and Flying type both represent energies tied to animalistic shapes, arthropods, and flying creatures respectively. The former has some occasional overlaps with Fighting type, similarly symbolizing heroism. This is likely due to its inspiration from the Japanese franchise Kamen Rider, following the adventures of superheroes dressed with insect motifs. For this reason, Bug and Fighting aren't very effective against each other, playing on the same side. The same goes for Fairy, albeit one-sided, while both moves win against the dark. More usually, however, these are just powerful, yet mundane bugs. When they don't attack physically, they resort to powder or noise produced by their bodies, if not to more peculiar techniques, Similarly, inspiring fear, their moves are also super effective against Psychic, while they can neutralize grass by chewing their leaves. Bug things. Other than that, however, their exoskeletons are frail against flames and rocks, while they effectively resist against ground-type moves, and their attacks aren't exactly suitable to a versatile fight, also falling flat on incorporeal ghosts, poisonous enemies, and impenetrable metals. Moreover, birds constitute Bug's natural predators, which is why Flying type is also super effective against Bug. Extremely fast, these Pokemon can either attack through their wings and beaks by generating strong wind currents through their flapping. Similarly to their targets, they also feature a similar dichotomy against rock and ground, suffering the ranged attacks of the former while being immune to the shockwaves of the latter, flying above the land. The same weakness is also shown toward other solid-like energies, their wings freezing at lower temperatures, while their attacks can't optimally damage metal. Electricity also neutralizes their advantage in the air, thunders striking them from the clouds above. Nonetheless, altitude grants them the upper hand against fighting-type Pokemon, incapable of striking a target out of their range, as well as grass-type, seeds similarly entering their diet, while branches are used for their nests. As for their giants, it's anyone's guess. Without a doubt, the idea that arthropods and winged creatures are fundamental archetypes is intriguing, especially when you kind of think about the idea that a lot of insects predate a lot of just creatures we know nowadays. But anything concerning their appearance and their powers is beyond even the realm of speculation. If we'll ever have a more complete picture, only time will tell. Now that we've reached an ulterior climax with the introduction of terrestrialization and its relation with chaos, what path will developers decide to take? Will they take a step back in the grand scheme of things to fill all the unspoken gaps, or perhaps they'll write a completely new page in the franchise's history? The only thing we can do is wait and find out. And that concludes the article written by Kiskeym. Assuming I'm saying the word right, I've probably said it wrong about 17 times. I am tired and exhausted, but my brain is happy. This was an amazing read once again. I don't intend to actually cover more of their stuff because I want you to go check out their articles firsthand. I find it incredibly important that you go directly support them by looking and reading their articles. My own personal thoughts I've said throughout this. I don't know if there's much else that I could say, and instead all I can really say at this point is thank you for listening, and thank you for watching. I appreciate the time that it takes for someone else to even listen to this stuff, and leave your comments behind, as I would love to return that time even more so than I already have by just destroying my vocal cords to read all of this in one good go, as I love to respond to comments, and comments help boost a video's reach and helps boost the channel overall. And if you'd like to go the extra mile, become a member for as little as $3 a month. It supports the channel immensely. You get great perks, and I'm not going to destroy my vocal cords any further. So with that then, as always, thank you so much for watching. Don't do anything I wouldn't do. Don't do anything I would do. Please be nice to each other. I love you, and I'll see you next time. Bye!